The most productive thing you did last Tuesday was think about doing things. Not all of it. Some of it was real. But there was a stretch, probably mid-afternoon, maybe late at night, where you were working very hard on something that produced nothing. You were analyzing, weighing, reconsidering, running the same variables through the same mental loop, arriving at the same uncomfortable place, and then starting again. And it felt like thinking. It had the texture of thinking. Your brain was active. You were engaged. You might have even told someone you were working through something. You weren't. You were stuck. And the particularly cruel part is that being stuck at a certain level of intelligence looks almost identical to being careful. This book is about that gap. The space between the appearance of thinking and the act of deciding. Between analysis and movement. Between the person you are at 2 a.m. running scenarios in your head and the person you're trying to become. The one who just makes the call and moves. Here's what I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you that overthinking is a disease of the weak, or that decisive people are simply braver than you. That's not accurate and it's not useful. The people who overthink most consistently are often the most intelligent people in the room. That's not a compliment dressed up as criticism. It's just a fact with an unfortunate consequence. Smart people find more to think about. More variables, more angles, more potential failure modes, more ways the thing could go sideways. The machinery is faster, so it generates more material to be anxious about. Congratulations on your processing speed. What we're going to examine carefully, because the irony of overthinking a book about overthinking is not lost on me, is why your brain does this, what it actually costs you, and how to interrupt the pattern before it costs you more. No performance here. No manufactured urgency. Just an honest account of one of the quietest and most expensive habits a person can have. Let's begin. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one. It's always interesting to see where this reaches. Chapter 1. The Golden Age of Not Deciding. Somewhere right now, a very intelligent person is researching the optimal time to start. Not the thing itself, the optimal time to start the thing. They have 17 tabs open. 3 of them are about productivity frameworks. One of them is a Reddit thread from 2019 where someone asked a similar question and got 43 answers that contradict each other. They've been at this for 2 hours. They feel, genuinely, that they are making progress. They are not making progress. We are living in history's most sophisticated era of not deciding. And the infrastructure supporting it has never been better. You have access to more information than any human being who ever lived. More expert opinions, more case studies, more data sets, more first-hand accounts, more contrarian takes on the first-hand accounts. The research tools are fast. The content is endless. And your brain, your very capable, very well-intentioned brain, has interpreted all of this as an invitation to keep looking. This is the trap. And it was built with good materials. Your great-grandmother didn't overthink whether to plant the garden. There were 3 seed options and a window of weather. She planted. Your grandfather didn't spend a week analyzing whether to take the job in the next town. There was one job. He took it. We look back at that decisiveness and call it simplicity. We're wrong. It wasn't simplicity. It was constraint. And constraint, it turns out, is one of the most underrated cognitive advantages a person can have. Remove the constraint, add infinite options, And watch what happens to perfectly functional human decision-making. It dissolves. The neuroscientists have a name for the mental state that overthinking produces. The default mode network, the brain's background processing system, the voice that never quite stops talking, the part of you that's narrating your own life while your life is happening. It activates when you're not focused on the external world. It was designed for reflection, for consolidating experience, for making sense of things. It was not designed to run at full speed for 6 hours while you decide whether to send the email. I watched a colleague spend 4 days deciding whether to apply for a promotion. The deadline was Friday. He applied Thursday night. Got the job. Told me afterward that the 4 days were the most exhausting of his month. I asked what had changed between Monday and Thursday. He said, "Nothing. I just ran out of time to keep thinking." That is the confession the whole system is built on. Here's the uncomfortable arithmetic. You make roughly 350 decisions a day. Most of them you make without noticing. Which route, which tone of voice, which version of yourself to present in a given room. These decisions happen quickly because they have to. Your brain doesn't have the bandwidth to analyze all of them. But then there are the decisions you consciously hold. And for those, something shifts. Consciousness arrives and brings with it a peculiar kind of interference. The very act of paying deliberate attention to a decision can degrade the quality of that decision. This is not a metaphor. This is what the research shows. Studies consistently demonstrate that people making choices between complex options, jobs, apartments, relationships, investments, often do better when they're distracted during the deliberation period than when they're focused intensely on the choice. Their unconscious mind, given space to work, integrates information more effectively than their conscious mind, grinding through variables one at a time. Your best thinking, in other words, often happens when you're not trying to think, which means that what feels like careful analysis is sometimes just interference. The golden age of overthinking isn't producing better decisions. It's producing more elaborate justifications for not making them. The information is richer. The delay is longer. The outcome is roughly the same as if you'd decided 2 weeks ago with what you already knew. The question isn't how to find more information. The question is when to stop looking for it. Most people never ask that question. They treat the search as the work. They confuse the research phase with the productive phase. And so the research phase never ends, because ending it would require a decision. And the decision is exactly what they've been trying to avoid. This is not a character flaw, it's a design flaw. Your brain is running ancient protective software on modern hardware, in a world that never existed when the software was written. Understanding that doesn't fix it. But it does mean you can stop being impressed by your own hesitation. Chapter 2. What your brain is actually doing. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a predator and a performance review. This is not a figure of speech. At the neurological level, the stress response triggered by, "What if I say the wrong thing in Thursday's meeting?" is structurally identical to the one triggered by, "Something large is moving toward me in the dark." Same hormones, same physical preparation, same narrowing of focus onto the threat. The threat is a calendar event. Your body is preparing to sprint. Picture a man sitting completely still at his kitchen table at 11 p.m. His coffee is cold. He hasn't moved in 40 minutes. From the outside, he looks calm, maybe tired. On the inside, his amygdala is treating the question of whether to quit his job like an incoming predator, flooding him with cortisol, running worst-case scenarios at high speed, keeping him locked in a state of hypervigilance that was designed for emergencies and is now just Tuesday. This is what overthinking looks like from the inside of the skull. The architecture is old, hundreds of thousands of years old, and for most of that time, it was exactly right. The ancestors who paused before stepping into unknown terrain, who ran mental simulations of what might go wrong, who treated uncertainty as a signal to be cautious, they survived at higher rates. The impulsive ones frequently did not. Caution was selected for. Analysis was rewarded with continued existence. Then the environment changed completely, and the brain didn't get the update. What you're left with is a threat detection system calibrated for physical, immediate survival-level dangers, now running continuous analysis on situations that are abstract, future-oriented, and in most cases recoverable from regardless of how they turn out. The machinery is excellent. It's just aimed at the wrong targets entirely. The prefrontal cortex, your executive function center, the part responsible for planning and reasoning, gets overloaded. Too many programs running simultaneously. Processing slows. Judgment gets cloudy. You start seeing problems in places where there aren't any, because the system is primed to find threats, and it will find them whether or not they're actually there. I spent 3 weeks once deciding whether to move cities. I had spreadsheets. I had pros and cons lists. I had consulted people who had made similar moves. By week 2, I was researching things that had no bearing on the decision whatsoever. Cost of specific grocery items, average commute times for jobs I hadn't applied for, climate data going back 30 years. The spreadsheet grew. The clarity did not. I eventually moved. The spreadsheet was never consulted again. The anterior cingulate cortex, the region that monitors for conflict and flags uncertainty, was running the show by that point. It doesn't distinguish between important uncertainty and trivial uncertainty. It just detects it and signals alarm. And when you're overthinking, this region gets stuck in the on position. Every new variable becomes a new alarm. Every unanswered question becomes a new threat. This is the loop. And it has a self-reinforcing quality that makes it genuinely difficult to interrupt from the inside. Here's the part that should concern you more than the anxiety. Every time you choose analysis over action, you're not just delaying a decision, you're training your brain. Neural pathways strengthen through repetition. The overthinking loop, run enough times, becomes a default route. Your brain starts reaching for it automatically, the way your hand reaches for your phone without conscious instruction. The rut gets deeper. The pull gets stronger. You are, in the most literal neurological sense, practicing indecision. And practice, as everyone knows, makes permanent. The counterintuitive rescue comes from the same mechanism. Neuroplasticity runs in both directions. The brain that learned to overthink can learn to decide. Not through motivation or willpower. Those are the wrong tools for this job. Through repetition of a different pattern. Small decisions made quickly, survived, and repeated. New pathways form. Old ones weaken from disuse. Your brain is not broken. It's just been practicing the wrong thing for a long time. The stress hormones flooding your system when you face uncertainty aren't a sign that the decision is genuinely dangerous. They're a sign that your ancient brain hasn't distinguished between the two. You're not afraid of the decision. You're afraid of the tiger. The tiger isn't there. That distinction sounds simple. It doesn't feel simple at 11 p.m. at a cold kitchen table, but it's the thing worth knowing. Because once you understand what the alarm system is actually responding to, you stop taking the alarm quite so seriously. You hear it, you note it, and then you decide anyway. Not because you're fearless, but because you finally understand what you were afraid of. It was never the decision. It was the uncertainty underneath it. And uncertainty, it turns out, doesn't actually go away with more analysis. It just gets more elaborately decorated. Chapter 3. The math you won't do. You have never once sat down and calculated what your overthinking actually costs. This is by design. The same brain that generates the overthinking also controls the accounting, and it has a strong institutional interest in not running those numbers. So it doesn't. It keeps the costs abstract, diffuse, easy to wave away. It lets you feel the anxiety without ever showing you the bill. Here's the bill. A woman in her early 30s spends 45 minutes every morning deciding what to eat, what to wear, how to respond to the email she's been sitting on since Wednesday, whether to bring up the thing with her manager, whether the thing with her manager is even worth bringing up, whether she's overreacting, whether she's underreacting. By the time she leaves the house, she has made no decisions of consequence and spent nearly an hour of her sharpest cognitive hours producing nothing but a low-grade headache. Multiply that by every weekday. Multiply that by a year. That's roughly 250 hours. 6.5 full working weeks. Evaporated not into rest, not into pleasure, not into anything recoverable, but into the frictionless nowhere of unresolved mental loops. This is the math you won't do, because the result is uncomfortable. Time is the visible cost. There are less visible ones. Decision fatigue is real, measurable, and quietly devastating. Your capacity to make good decisions is not fixed across a day. It depletes. Every choice you make, even a trivial one, even one that goes nowhere, draws from the same finite cognitive reservoir. Judges give harsher sentences later in the day. Doctors order more unnecessary tests in afternoon hours. Investors make worse calls after long deliberation sessions. When you spend your morning's cognitive resources on small decisions, what to wear, what to eat, whether to respond to that message, you arrive at the decisions that actually matter running on empty. The important call gets the tired version of your judgment. The meeting where you needed to be sharp gets whatever's left. This is not a metaphor for being tired. This is a measurable neurological phenomenon, and overthinkers burn through their reservoir faster than almost anyone else, because they're not just making decisions. They're making them, unmaking them, remaking them, and then questioning the remake. The opportunity cost is harder to quantify, so most people don't bother. But try. Think about the last meaningful opportunity you analyzed past its expiration date. Not a hypothetical, a real one. The job you researched until the position was filled. The investment you tracked until the entry point closed. The conversation you rehearsed until the moment for it passed. The relationship you evaluated until the other person stopped waiting. What did the additional research actually add? What did the extra 2 weeks of deliberation produce that the first 3 days hadn't already established? In almost every case, the answer is more doubt, not more clarity. More variables, not more confidence. More sophisticated reasons to delay, dressed up as thoroughness. The financial costs accumulate with compound interest, which is darkly appropriate, because compound interest is also what you lose access to when you wait. The person who starts investing imperfectly at 25 outperforms the person who invests perfectly at 35 by a margin that no quality of decision can overcome. Time in the market is not a motivational poster, it's arithmetic. And overthinking borrows from that arithmetic without asking. I once spent 6 months researching a decision that took 3 days to implement and was effectively irreversible within a week. The 6 months added nothing to the outcome. What they did add was 6 months of low-level ambient stress, a thoroughly annotated notebook I never opened again, and the quiet background awareness that I was stalling. I knew I was stalling. That's the part nobody talks about. Overthinkers usually know they're overthinking. They just can't find the exit. The psychological cost is the one that compounds most viciously. Every time you second-guess a decision, you erode something. Not just confidence in that particular choice, confidence in the mechanism that makes choices, in yourself as a person capable of judgment. And once that erosion starts, it feeds the cycle. You trust yourself less, so you analyze more. So you trust yourself less, so you analyze more. Learned helplessness doesn't arrive as a dramatic collapse. It arrives as a gradual narrowing. You stop applying for things you're qualified for. You stop proposing ideas you believe in. You stop taking up space in rooms where your input matters. Not because you've decided you can't do those things, because you've quietly stopped deciding at all. The health costs are boring to describe and worth describing anyway. Chronic cortisol elevation suppresses immune function, disrupts sleep architecture, elevates cardiovascular risk, and degrades the prefrontal cortex function you're relying on to think your way out of the situation. Overthinking is not just an intellectual problem. It is physiologically expensive. And then there's the thing that doesn't have a category in any cost analysis: the present moment, missed. The conversation you were physically present for, but mentally absent from because you were processing something that happened 3 days ago, or might happen next week. The meal you ate without tasting it. The view you didn't see because your eyes were open and your attention was somewhere else entirely. These don't show up in any ledger. They just accumulate quietly into a life that happened mostly in your head. That's the real cost. Not the time, not the money, not the opportunities, though all of those matter. The real cost is a life experienced primarily as a rehearsal for a performance that never quite arrives. The math isn't complicated. It's just unpleasant enough that most people prefer not to run it. You just ran it. Chapter 4: Why Your Brain Lies and Why It's Very Convincing. Your brain is not trying to sabotage you. That's what makes this so difficult. It genuinely believes it's helping. Every anxiety it generates, every scenario it runs, every worst case it constructs in vivid detail at 1 a.m., all of it is produced by a system that thinks it's protecting you. The intentions are good. The execution is catastrophically misapplied. And the most frustrating part is that the protection feels real because it once was. Picture a very competent security guard who was hired in 1987 and never received updated threat briefings. He is still checking everyone's shoes for concealed daggers. He is thorough, dedicated, deeply professional about his work. He has simply been protecting you from the wrong things for 35 years, and nobody has told him. That's your brain's threat detection system. Excellent guard. Outdated briefing. The evolutionary logic is sound. The humans who survived long enough to become your ancestors were disproportionately the ones who paused, who checked, who ran mental simulations of what might go wrong before committing to action. Caution had survival value. Impulsivity in an environment with actual predators and actual scarcity and actual physical consequences for misjudgment was frequently fatal. So caution got selected for. Across hundreds of thousands of years, the careful ones passed their genes forward at higher rates than the reckless ones. You are, in a meaningful sense, the descendant of the most successful warriors in human history. Your anxiety is an inheritance, a very old one. The environment changed. The inheritance didn't. What you're left with is a negativity bias so deeply wired that researchers can measure it in infants. The brain treats potential losses as approximately twice as significant as equivalent gains. Losing $100 produces roughly twice the emotional response of gaining $100. This was rational when resources were scarce and loss meant starvation. In a world of abundance, it means you dramatically overweight the downside of every decision and underweight the upside. Your brain is running a risk calculation that was calibrated for a world that no longer exists, and it's very good at hiding this fact. Here's how the lie works. Your brain doesn't present its anxiety as ancient survival programming running in an inappropriate context. It presents it as insight, as wisdom, as the responsible, intelligent voice that's just making sure you've considered everything. It gives the anxiety good credentials and a serious tone, and then sends it out to slow you down. When you're lying awake at night running the same scenario for the fourth time, it doesn't feel like a malfunction. It feels like diligence. When you're researching past the point of usefulness, it doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like thoroughness. The brain has dressed up its defensive crouch in the clothing of careful thought, and it's extremely convincing because you're the one wearing it. The negativity bias shows up everywhere once you know what you're looking at. In how you weight feedback, one critical comment lands harder than 3 positive ones. In how you remember outcomes, losses are recalled more vividly and in more detail than equivalent gains. In how you project futures, the bad scenarios are rendered in high definition, while the good ones stay vague and theoretical. This is not pessimism as personality. This is hardware. I had a friend who spent 8 months deciding whether to leave a job she described, consistently and without variation, as making her miserable. 8 months. Every conversation circled back to it. What if the next place is worse? What if she regrets it? What if she's wrong about how bad this is? I watched her run the same loop with minor variations for the better part of a year. She left. The next place was better. She told me she wished she'd left sooner. I did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say. The completion drive compounds everything. Your brain is designed to resolve open loops. Unfinished business creates a low-grade psychological tension, what researchers call the Zeigarnik effect, that persists until resolution. This is why you remember the interrupted task more vividly than the completed one. Your brain keeps the file open, flagged for return. Unresolved decisions are open loops, and your brain, trying to resolve them, runs them repeatedly. Not because repetition produces resolution, it usually doesn't, but because the drive to close the loop is stronger than the recognition that thinking alone can't close it. The only thing that closes the loop is a decision. Your brain knows this somewhere. But instead of pushing you toward the decision, it pushes you toward more analysis, because more analysis feels like progress toward resolution, even when it isn't. The security guard, checking shoes, thorough, exhausting, wrong. Choice overload does the rest of the damage. The famous jam study, 24 varieties versus 6, with the smaller selection producing 10 times more purchases, demonstrated something important. More options don't produce better choices. They produce worse ones, or no choice at all. Your brain interprets abundance as complexity, complexity as risk, and risk as reason to pause. The pause becomes permanent. What's worth understanding is that none of these mechanisms are character flaws. The negativity bias isn't weakness. The completion drive isn't neurosis. The threat detection system isn't dysfunction. They're all doing exactly what they were built to do. They've just been deployed in a context their designers never imagined. Your brain is a remarkable instrument genuinely trying to protect you from dangers that are mostly gone, using methods that mostly backfire, in situations that mostly don't require protection. Understanding this doesn't make the anxiety disappear, but it does change the relationship. You stop treating the anxiety as signal, as important information about the actual danger level of the situation, and start treating it as noise. Predictable, understandable, occasionally useful noise from a very old system running a very outdated protocol. You can hear it without obeying it. That's not a small thing. Chapter 5. The productivity illusion. Thinking feels like work. This is the central lie. It has the texture of effort. Your brain is active, energy is being consumed. You feel mentally engaged in a way that resembles productivity so closely that the two become genuinely difficult to distinguish from the inside. You finish a 2-hour thinking session feeling tired. Tired feels like you did something. You didn't do something. You burned calories staying still. This is the most sophisticated form of self-deception available to an intelligent person. And it's available exclusively to intelligent people, which is why they're the most susceptible to it. You need a certain level of cognitive horsepower to generate the kind of elaborate, internally consistent, genuinely compelling mental activity that passes for productive thinking while producing nothing. Less capable machinery just gets bored and stops. Your brain keeps going. It finds new angles. It generates new concerns. It produces material of sufficient quality that you can't easily dismiss it. The analysis feels substantive because it is substantive. It's just not moving you anywhere. A man sits at his desk on a Sunday afternoon with a legal pad and a good pen. He is going to plan his business. He has been going to plan his business for 11 Sundays in a row. The legal pad has notes from previous sessions. The notes are detailed. Some of them are quite good. None of them have been acted on, because acting on them would require finishing the plan, and finishing the plan would require deciding, and deciding would require committing, and committing would require being wrong in public if it doesn't work. So he plans. Again. The pad fills. The business doesn't start. Cognitive ease is the mechanism underneath this. When you think about something repeatedly, it becomes familiar. Familiarity registers as understanding. Understanding registers as readiness. But familiarity and readiness are not the same thing, and your brain doesn't reliably distinguish between them. You can feel ready for something you've only ever encountered in your own head. This false readiness is dangerous precisely because it's comfortable. You feel prepared. You feel like the work is being done. The gap between that feeling and actual preparation only reveals itself when you attempt the thing and discover that mental rehearsal and real performance operate on completely different systems. The research is consistent and somewhat humbling on this point. People who extensively deliberate before complex decisions don't reliably make better choices than people who decide quickly. In many domains, the quick deciders do better. Not because speed is intrinsically valuable, but because the deliberation introduces interference, doubt, second-guessing, artificial complexity that wasn't in the original clear signal. Your first instinct processed the situation using everything you know, everything you've experienced, everything you've observed, in approximately the time it took to read this sentence. Your conscious analysis then arrived and started picking it apart. And the picking apart, more often than not, made things worse. This is uncomfortable to accept because we've been told the opposite our entire lives. Think before you act. Sleep on it. Don't rush. Consider all the angles. This advice isn't wrong exactly. It's just applied indiscriminately to situations that don't require it, by people who've never specified how much thinking is enough thinking. Nobody tells you when to stop, so you don't. I had a writing project once that I planned for 4 months before writing a single sentence. The outline was excellent, genuinely excellent, color-coded, hierarchical, referenced. When I finally started writing, I abandoned it within 2 weeks because the actual writing revealed things about the material that the planning never could have. The outline was for a book that didn't exist yet. The real book emerged from the writing itself, from the doing, from the contact with actual sentences and actual ideas trying to survive on the page. The 4 months produced a beautiful map of a country I'd never visited. This is what planning often is. A map drawn from imagination rather than territory. And the territory, when you finally enter it, is always different. Sometimes radically different. The plan was never going to survive contact with reality. The only question was how long you wanted to delay that contact. Action generates information that thinking cannot. This is not a motivational statement. It is a practical description of epistemology. You cannot know what a conversation will feel like until you're in it. You cannot know whether a job is right until you're doing it. You cannot know whether a business will work until you've tried to make it work and watched the market respond. The thinking brain and the doing brain are different instruments, processing different kinds of information, producing different kinds of knowledge. Favoring one over the other isn't a personality trait. It's a choice about which kind of knowledge you want access to. Thinkers get theoretical knowledge. Doers get empirical knowledge. And in most domains that matter, empirical knowledge is more useful. The planning fallacy makes this worse. You consistently underestimate how long things will take and overestimate your ability to predict outcomes. This means your plans are almost always wrong in ways that more planning won't fix. The wrongness isn't a planning quality problem. It's a category problem. Plans are inherently incomplete representations of future reality. More detailed plans are more detailed, incomplete representations. The minimum viable product model in business exists precisely because of this. Companies that spend 2 years building a perfect product before showing it to customers consistently lose to companies that build a rough version in 3 months and iterate based on actual feedback. The feedback loop is the product development process. You can't simulate it. You have to enter it. The illusion of productive thinking is seductive because it offers something genuinely valuable. The feeling of control, of progress, of intelligent engagement with your challenges. It just doesn't offer the thing it appears to offer, which is movement. There's a version of you that knows this already. That version has been watching you think about the thing instead of doing the thing for longer than either of you would like to admit. The legal pad is full. The Sunday is ending. And the business is exactly where it was last week. Completely intact, thoroughly planned, and entirely inside your head. Chapter 6, The 2-Minute Rule. Set a timer for 2 minutes. Make the decision when it goes off. That's it. That's the whole thing. And your brain is already generating reasons why this particular decision is different, why this one actually requires more time, why the 2-minute rule is a fine idea in principle, but doesn't account for the specific complexity of your specific situation, which is, you'll agree, unusually nuanced. It isn't unusually nuanced. Almost nothing is. Here's what 2 minutes actually is. It's long enough to consider the primary options, weigh the most obvious consequences, check the choice against your gut, and decide. It is not long enough to generate the 17 secondary concerns that aren't relevant to the decision, but feel relevant because your brain produced them, and your brain's productions feel important. The timer isn't a gimmick. It's a truth-telling device. What it tells you is how much of your deliberation time was actually necessary versus how much was the overthinking tax. The additional hours and days your brain levied on top of the genuine consideration time, billing them as productive and spending them on anxiety. Most decisions can be made in 2 minutes. The evidence for this is simple and slightly embarrassing. Most people, when forced to decide immediately, make the same choice they eventually make after days of deliberation. The deliberation didn't change the answer. It just delayed it, and charged interest on the delay in the form of stress, lost momentum, and the slow erosion of confidence that comes from watching yourself not decide. Picture a woman at a restaurant. She's been looking at the menu for 12 minutes. The waiter has come back twice. The table is waiting. She is, in a very small but structurally identical way, doing exactly what she does with the bigger decisions. Running scenarios, weighing options, trying to identify the optimal choice from a field of reasonable alternatives. When the waiter returns a third time and stands quietly, she orders. In approximately 4 seconds, she had enough information on mine at 1. Minutes 2 through 12 were the overthinking tax. Your brain operates on 2 decision-making systems, and understanding which one you're using matters. System 1 is fast, pattern-based, experiential. It processes an enormous amount of information almost instantly, drawing on everything you've learned and observed and lived through, and produces a response. System 2 is slow, deliberate, analytical. It processes sequentially, consciously, one variable at a time. Overthinking is what happens when you route a System 1 decision through System 2. You take something your instincts resolved correctly in seconds, and you subject it to a sequential analytical process that handles roughly 7 variables simultaneously, which sounds like a lot until you consider that the decision you're analyzing may involve hundreds of interacting factors that System 1 was already handling perfectly well. You have traded a supercomputer for a calculator. The calculator feels more trustworthy because you can see its work. That doesn't make it better. The 2-minute rule forces rerouting. When the timer starts, your brain understands that extended deliberation isn't available, and it does something interesting. It prioritizes. It surfaces the factors that actually matter and filters out the ones that don't. Not because you told it to, but because scarcity of time produces clarity of focus. This is why people report that deadlines make them sharper, not worse. The constraint is the tool. I set a timer once for a decision I'd been sitting on for 2 weeks. Career-related, moderately significant, the kind of thing I'd convinced myself warranted extended deliberation. The timer went off. I made the call. It took about 90 seconds. The decision I made was the same one I'd been leaning toward since day 3 of the 2 weeks. The remaining 11 days had added nothing except the low-grade background noise of an unresolved question. What the 2-minute rule also does, and this is less obvious, is force you to confront the actual stakes of the decision. Because here is what almost always happens when the timer goes off and you have to decide. You realize the consequences of a wrong choice are substantially smaller than your analysis suggested. Most decisions are reversible. This bears repeating because your brain treats it as a footnote when it should be the headline. Jobs can be left. Cities can be moved from. Relationships can be ended. Investments can be sold. Business strategies can be pivoted. Courses of action can be corrected. The catastrophic irreversibility your brain keeps presenting as the reason for extended deliberation is, in the overwhelming majority of cases, simply not accurate. You are not diffusing a bomb. You are choosing. And the difference between a good choice and a slightly suboptimal choice, made quickly, is almost always smaller than the cost of not choosing at all. The opportunity that closes while you deliberate. The momentum that dissipates. The version of you that was ready to move forward 2 weeks ago and has since been standing in the same place, getting tired. Start where the stakes are genuinely low. What to eat, what to watch, whether to go. Set the timer. Decide when it goes off. Do this repeatedly, with the specific intention of noticing that nothing catastrophic follows your quick decisions. Because it won't. And your brain needs that evidence. It needs the accumulated proof that fast decisions are survivable, that the thing it was protecting you from by insisting on more time wasn't actually dangerous. Build the case file slowly, entry by entry. Quick decision, non-catastrophic outcome. Quick decision, non-catastrophic outcome. Your brain is running a risk model that's wildly inaccurate. The only way to recalibrate it is with data from actual experience, not with more thinking about hypothetical experience. The timer goes off. Decide. Whatever you just thought of first, that's probably it. You knew before the timer started. You've known for a while. The 2 minutes wasn't for discovering the answer. It was for giving yourself permission to already have it. Chapter 7. Good enough is a decision, not a failure. Somewhere in your history, someone taught you that settling is shameful. They didn't mean to teach you that. They were probably trying to teach you ambition, or standards, or self-respect. But the lesson landed wrong, and now you're applying it to decisions that have nothing to do with settling, and calling the application thoroughness. The 80% rule is not about lowering your standards. It's about understanding a specific mathematical reality that your perfectionist brain finds genuinely offensive. The last 20% of certainty costs more than everything that came before it, and produces less than almost anything you've paid for in your life. Here's the geometry of it. The first 20% of your research on any decision gives you roughly 80% of the information you actually need. This is uncomfortable, but consistent. You read 3 reviews of the restaurant and you know enough. You talk to 2 people who've done the job and you have the shape of it. You look at 3 apartments and you understand the market. The core information arrives early. It arrives efficiently. And then you keep going, because stopping feels like quitting, and quitting feels like the thing you were warned against. So you read 47 reviews. You talk to 9 people. You look at 14 apartments. And by the end, you are less certain than you were after the first 3. Because additional information introduces competing signals, minority opinions, edge cases, and the particular brand of paralysis that comes from knowing too much about things that don't change your answer. A researcher at a pharmaceutical company once described this to me with unusual precision. She said that in drug trials, the first data cohort tells you most of what you need to know about whether the thing works. The subsequent cohorts refine the confidence intervals and satisfy regulatory requirements. But the fundamental signal, does this work or not, is almost always clear early. The rest is documentation. I asked her whether this applied to personal decisions. She paused for a long time. Then she said, "Probably more than we'd like. The military understood this before the researchers did. The standard operating principle in combat isn't wait until you're certain. Certainty in combat is a fantasy. The principle is act when you have sufficient information to make a reasonable decision, because delay has its own casualty rate. The cost of waiting for perfect intelligence is often higher than the cost of acting on imperfect intelligence and adjusting. Your career decisions are not combat, but the principle transfers cleanly. Waiting for certainty has a casualty rate. It just moves slowly enough that you don't notice it as casualties. You notice it as a vague sense that time is passing and things aren't moving. Perfectionism is the engine underneath this, and it runs on a specific fuel. The belief that there is one correct answer to most decisions, and that sufficient analysis will locate it. This belief is wrong in ways that are worth examining specifically. Most decisions don't have correct answers. They have trade-offs. Every option you're choosing between offers some things and costs some other things. The question isn't which option is objectively best. It's which trade-offs align with your current priorities. And your current priorities are already known to you. You don't need more information to access them. You need to consult them honestly and then choose. The 80% threshold is a forcing function for exactly this consultation. When you commit to deciding at 80% confidence, you're committing to choosing based on what you actually know and value, rather than searching for an answer that would make the choice feel inevitable rather than chosen. Chosen is what decisions are. They don't become inevitable with more research. They become more delayed. There's a specific cognitive trap that activates past the 80% mark. Researchers call it information overload, but the mechanism is more precise than that label suggests. When you have too much information, your brain starts weighting minor factors as heavily as major ones, because the sheer volume of inputs overwhelms the hierarchy. Small concerns get elevated. Important factors get buried under accumulated detail. Your judgment actually degrades. You become less capable of deciding well, not more, as the information pile grows past the point of utility. This is why the instinct you had on day 2 of your research was often clearer than the conclusion you reached on day 14. Day 2, your brain was working with signal. Day 14, it was working with signal plus 2 weeks of noise. I know someone who spent 4 months choosing between 2 job offers. Both were good. One paid slightly more. One had a slightly better culture fit. She made lists. She consulted advisors. She ran financial projections. She asked the same question to different people, hoping for different answers. On month 4, she chose the culture fit job. It was the job she'd been leaning toward at the end of week 1. The 4 months didn't make her choose better. They made her choose later, with considerably more anxiety, and with a reduced ability to start the new role with energy and enthusiasm because she'd spent the preceding months exhausted by her own deliberation. Good enough is not a consolation prize. It is an accurate description of what most decisions actually require. Good enough means you have sufficient information, sufficient clarity, and sufficient alignment with your priorities to choose and move. Good enough means the remaining uncertainty is smaller than the cost of eliminating it. It also means something psychologically important that doesn't get enough attention. Good enough decisions get implemented with more energy than perfect ones. When you've spent months arriving at a choice, you arrive depleted. The enthusiasm you needed for execution got consumed by deliberation. The version of you that was ready to commit in week 2 is not the version making the commitment in month 4. Good enough, chosen early, gets the best version of your implementation. Perfect, chosen late, gets whatever's left. The 80% rule requires making peace with a specific discomfort. You will sometimes be wrong. Not often and not catastrophically, but sometimes. And when you are, you will adjust. This is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. Life runs on iteration, not optimization. You make a reasonable choice with available information, observe the results, and incorporate what you learn into the next choice. This is how everything actually improves. Not through perfect upfront decisions. Through repeated, reasonable decisions made quickly enough that the feedback loop stays tight and the learning accumulates. 80% is enough. It has always been enough. The last 20% is just the price your perfectionism charges for the privilege of feeling certain about something you were never going to be certain about anyway. Chapter 8. Deadlines are not cruel. They're honest. The most useful thing a deadline does is remove a comfortable fiction. The fiction is this: that you are still deciding, that the decision remains genuinely open, that the additional time you're giving yourself is being used for legitimate deliberation rather than for the sophisticated avoidance of commitment that your brain has dressed up as deliberation. Deadlines are not cruel. They are honest. They tell you what is actually true, that you have enough information, that more time will not substantially improve your decision, and that the discomfort you're feeling is not a signal to keep thinking. It's a signal that thinking is finished and choosing is next. Your brain hates this. A project manager at a mid-sized company once told me that every project without a hard external deadline eventually expanded to fill all available time and then asked for more. Not because the work required it, because the people doing the work were, at some level, more comfortable in the process than in the completion. Completion requires commitment. Commitment requires accepting that the thing is now real, and real things can fail, and failure is observable by other people. Process is safe. Completion is exposed. This is why self-imposed deadlines fail at rates that would embarrass any other planning tool. You set the deadline. You miss it. You extend it. You miss the extension. You tell yourself the situation has grown more complex. The situation has not grown more complex. You have grown more committed to avoiding the discomfort of finishing. External deadlines work because they introduce a consequence that exists independently of your anxiety about it. The job application closes at midnight, whether or not you're ready. The early registration discount expires Friday, whether or not you've decided. The apartment gets rented to someone else, whether or not your analysis is complete. The deadline doesn't negotiate. It doesn't extend because you have concerns. It simply arrives and then passes, taking the opportunity with it. This indifference is the feature, not the bug. What effective deadlines do at the neurological level is shift the cost calculation. Before a deadline, the cost of not deciding is abstract and future-oriented, vague opportunity loss, theoretical momentum cost. After a deadline, the cost of not deciding is concrete and immediate. The thing is gone, The moment passed, the window closed. Your brain responds very differently to concrete immediate costs than to abstract future ones. This is why urgency works, in marketing and in life. Not because it's manipulative, though it can be, but because it is accurately representing a real feature of how decisions interact with time. Opportunities genuinely do expire. The deadline is often just making visible a truth that was always there. The characteristics of deadlines that actually work are specific. First, they are tied to external events rather than internal preferences. "I'll decide by Friday" is a preference. "The offer expires Friday" is a fact. Your brain treats them differently. Build deadlines that are anchored to something outside yourself. A price increase, an application window, a conversation you've scheduled, a person you've told. Second, they are short enough to prevent further spiraling, but long enough to feel legitimate. For most personal decisions, this window is between 1 day and 1 week. Shorter than 1 day feels arbitrary. Longer than 1 week gives the overthinking brain enough runway to generate new material. Third, they include a predetermined default. If you don't actively choose by the deadline, something happens automatically. You take the first option you seriously considered. You defer to someone else's recommendation. You do nothing, and nothing becomes the choice. The default removes the fantasy of indefinite consideration. There is no indefinite consideration. There is only deciding now or deciding by default later. I told a friend once that if he hadn't made a decision about his living situation by the end of the month, I would assume he was staying where he was and stop helping him look. He made the decision in 4 days. Not because my ultimatum was particularly meaningful in practical terms, because it transformed the cost of inaction from abstract to concrete. Staying where he was became a choice he would be seen to have made. That visibility changed everything. Fourth, effective deadlines involve another person who knows about them. Not for accountability in the motivational sense. That version of accountability is easy to circumvent. For visibility. When someone else knows you've committed to deciding by Thursday, Thursday carries social weight that Thursday alone doesn't carry. Your brain attends to social consequences with remarkable seriousness. It always has. Use this. The graduated deadline is useful for genuinely complex decisions that resist compression into a single moment of choice. Break the decision into phases. 3 days to gather the most critical information. 2 more days to narrow to 2 options. 2 more days to choose between them. Each phase has its own deadline and its own defined output. Forward movement is enforced at each stage, preventing the endless recycling that characterizes unconstrained deliberation. The key word in that structure is defined. The output of each phase is specified in advance. Not think about it more, but identify the 3 most important factors. Not keep researching, but narrow to 2 options. Defined outputs prevent the phases from expanding into each other, which is what happens when the structure is loose and the anxiety is high. Here's what nobody explains clearly about decision deadlines. They don't make the decision easier. The discomfort of choosing is largely unchanged. What they do is make inaction more expensive than action. They shift the default from continuing to deliberate to deciding and moving. And once that default shifts, once staying still costs more than stepping forward, most people move. Not because they're ready, not because the uncertainty has resolved, not because they've finally found the clarity they were looking for, because the deadline arrived. And the deadline, unlike your anxiety, does not respond to further negotiation. That's not cruelty. That's the closest thing to kindness the calendar can offer. Chapter 9. Acting first, thinking after. You cannot think your way into a swimming pool. At some point, the water is cold and you are in it, and all the deliberation that preceded that moment becomes immediately and completely irrelevant. What matters now is swimming, and swimming, it turns out, is learned in the water, not in the chair beside it where you've been sitting for the past 40 minutes, developing a comprehensive understanding of aquatic physics. This is the central truth that the action-first mindset is built on. Not that thinking is useless, that thinking and doing are different instruments, producing different kinds of knowledge, and that the knowledge produced by doing is the kind you actually need most of the time. The chair gives you theory. The water gives you feedback. Feedback is what you build competence from. The traditional sequence is think, then act. Have the plan, then execute it. Understand the territory, then enter it. This sequence feels responsible because it front-loads the part that feels safe. The part where you're still in control, still adjusting, still protected from the consequences of commitment. The problem is that the plan is always wrong, not slightly wrong, structurally wrong, in ways that can't be corrected from the chair. The plan was built from imagination, and imagination is an incomplete model of reality. It captures what you know and expect. It cannot capture what you don't know and haven't experienced. And what you don't know and haven't experienced is precisely the material that will determine whether the thing works. Every entrepreneur who has launched something has a version of this story. The product they built based on what they believed customers wanted, and the pivot they made after 3 months of actual customer behavior revealed something entirely different. The pivot wasn't a failure. The pivot was the education. The launch was how they purchased it. The people who never launch never get the education. They keep refining the plan. The plan gets more detailed and more wrong simultaneously because additional planning without feedback is just additional imagination, more elaborate, equally disconnected from the territory it's trying to map. A woman decides she wants to change careers. She researches. She takes online assessments. She reads accounts of people who made similar transitions. She makes lists of her transferable skills. She consults career coaches. She does all of this for 14 months, without applying for a single job in the new field? Because she hasn't finished preparing. Because the preparation doesn't have a defined endpoint. Because preparation is safe and application is exposed. On month 15, she applies for one role, gets an interview, discovers in the first 20 minutes of conversation that the reality of the work is substantially different from her 14 months of research suggested. Not worse, just different. Specific in ways that research couldn't capture. The interview teaches her more about whether this is right than everything that preceded it. The 14 months were preparation for a decision she could have made in 3 weeks. Implementation intention is the psychological mechanism that makes action first work. When you commit to a specific action, not "I'll look into this," but "I'm sending the email tomorrow at 9 a.m., your brain begins organizing around that commitment. It starts noticing relevant information. It flags useful connections. It prepares you for the action in ways that abstract intention doesn't trigger. Action signals seriousness in a way that thinking doesn't. To yourself and to everyone around you. When you're thinking about starting a business, You receive sympathetic conversation. When you've registered the company and built a basic website, you receive introductions, advice, and sometimes customers. The action changed what people could offer you because it made visible something they could actually engage with. Momentum is real, and it is asymmetric. Objects in motion require less energy to keep moving than objects at rest require to start moving. This applies to people with uncomfortable accuracy. The first action is the most expensive. Every subsequent one is cheaper. And the longer you stay still, the more the inertia accumulates, and the more activation energy the first step requires. I had been meaning to write something for almost 2 years. Not a specific something. Just something. I had notes. I had outlines. I had a clear sense of what I wanted to eventually produce. What I didn't have was a single completed sentence that existed outside my own head. One afternoon, for reasons I can't fully reconstruct, I wrote 3 paragraphs. Bad paragraphs. Rough, provisional, obviously first draft paragraphs that I would rewrite entirely later. The 3 paragraphs broke something. After that, the writing moved. Not easily, not quickly, but it moved. The 2 years of thinking had not moved it a centimeter. The action-first mindset does not mean acting without any consideration. It means taking the smallest action that generates real feedback before you've finished your theoretical preparation. The minimum viable action, not the full commitment. The first step that puts you in contact with reality rather than with your imagination of reality. For the career change, that's not quitting your job. It's talking to one person who does the work you're considering. For the business, it's not writing the full business plan. It's having one conversation with a potential customer. For the relationship, it's not the serious conversation about the future. It's accepting the invitation you've been declining. These small actions are cheap. They are recoverable from if they don't go well, and they produce more useful information than any equivalent amount of thinking. They are also, and this matters more than it sounds, actions. They break the pattern of not acting. They establish that you are someone who does things. And identity, once established through behavior, tends to persist. The action-first mindset reframes failure productively. When you act quickly and the action produces poor results, you learn quickly. The feedback arrives while you still have time and energy to incorporate it. The entrepreneur who fails in month 3 can pivot by month 6. The entrepreneur who spent 3 years planning and then failed has lost 3 years and still has to do the pivoting. Failing fast is not recklessness dressed up in startup language. It's epistemology. It's an acknowledgement that reality is the only reliable teacher, and that you can either pay for the lesson early and cheaply or late and expensively, but you are going to pay for it either way. Your plan is not the work. Your plan is what you believe about the work before you've done it. The work will tell you what's actually true. Get in the water. The temperature is exactly what it is. No amount of thinking about it from the chair will change that, or prepare you for it, or make the first moment of contact less cold. What the chair gives you is a longer time sitting beside something you want to do. The water gives you swimming. Chapter 10, When It Hits Anyway. You will do everything in this book correctly, and the spiral will still come. Not because the tools don't work, because you're human, and humans have bad nights. And bad nights have a way of locating your most unresolved decisions and sitting down on them with their full weight. The anxiety doesn't wait for a convenient moment. It doesn't respect the progress you've made or the frameworks you've internalized. It arrives when it arrives, and it arrives at full strength. And the question isn't how to prevent it permanently. The question is, what to do in the 20 minutes after it shows up. This chapter is about those 20 minutes. The first thing worth knowing is that recognition is most of the work. Not recognition in the abstract. You already know you overthink, that knowledge hasn't fixed it. But recognition in the moment. The ability to catch yourself mid-spiral and name what's happening before it accelerates past the point where intervention is easy. The spiral has a texture. Learn it specifically, not generally. For most people, it includes a physical component, a tightness somewhere, a change in breathing, a quality of restlessness that makes stillness uncomfortable. It includes a cognitive component, the same thought returning on a short loop, a narrowing of perceived options, a tendency to treat unlikely scenarios as probable ones. It includes a temporal component, the mind leaving the present and relocating to a future that may never arrive. When you notice these things, you are at the easiest point of intervention. 5 minutes later is harder. 20 minutes later, the spiral has generated enough material to feel self-justifying, and you're no longer interrupting a pattern. You're trying to argue your way out of a building you're standing inside. Notice early. This is the instruction. It sounds simple because it is simple. Simple is not the same as easy. The circuit breaker is the first tool. 3 steps. Say stop, out loud if possible, in your head if necessary. Take 5 slow breaths, specifically attending to the physical sensation of breathing, rather than to any thought. Then ground yourself with immediate sensory information. 5 things you can see right now. 4 you can touch. 3 you can hear. 2 you can smell. 1 you can taste. This sequence works for a reason that has nothing to do with mindfulness marketing. You cannot think abstractly about future scenarios and attend to present sensory experience simultaneously. The brain doesn't have the architecture for it. When you force attention onto immediate physical reality, the abstract spiral loses its grip, not because you've solved anything, but because you've relocated your attention to a place where the spiral can't follow. I was in the middle of a conversation once, professional, moderately high stakes, when I realized I had stopped listening entirely. I was running a parallel internal analysis of how the conversation was going, what it implied, what I should say next, what I should have said 2 minutes ago. The person across from me was still talking. I had no idea what they were saying. I caught it. I named it internally. I brought my attention back to the room. The conversation went better after that than it had been going before. Not because I'd resolved the analysis, because I'd dropped it. The 2-question filter is useful when the spiral has enough momentum that grounding alone doesn't arrest it. Ask yourself 2 things only. What is the worst realistic outcome if this goes wrong? Not the worst imaginable outcome, the worst realistic one. And what is the actual cost of continued indecision, right now, today? The first question almost always reveals that your brain has been running an unrealistic worst case. The genuinely catastrophic scenarios your anxiety has been generating are, when examined with minimal analytical rigor, either highly unlikely or recoverable from. The second question almost always reveals a cost you've been ignoring. The sleep you're losing, the energy you're burning, the present moment you're absent from. These 2 questions don't solve the underlying decision. They recalibrate the stakes. And recalibrated stakes often reveal that the anxiety is disproportionate to the actual situation, which is enough to reduce it to a manageable level. The timer technique handles the cases where the spiral is attached to a real decision that genuinely needs to be made. Set 10 minutes. Use them to write down everything the spiral is generating, every concern, every scenario, every what if. Don't organize it. Don't evaluate it. Just empty the loop onto the page. When the timer ends, look at what you've written. Circle the one thing that is actually decision relevant. Make a small move toward resolving that one thing. Leave the rest on the page. The act of writing externalizes the spiral. Once it's on paper, it's no longer running inside your head. It's sitting in front of you, visible, static, considerably less threatening than it was when it was ambient and everywhere. Most people discover that the written version of their spiral is shorter and less impressive than the internal version. The loop was generating the same 7 concerns on rotation. They looked more numerous and more serious when they were formless. The outside perspective technique works differently. Ask yourself what you would tell someone you care about if they came to you with this exact situation. Not what you would tell yourself, what you would tell them. The advice changes. It becomes clearer, more direct, less contaminated by the specific anxieties that attach to your own decisions. You would tell them they have enough information. You would tell them the worst case is manageable. You would tell them to choose and move. The advice you'd give freely to someone else is almost always the advice you need and are withholding from yourself. Physical interruption is underrated and slightly embarrassing to recommend, which is probably why it works. When the spiral is running, your body is holding stress that movement can discharge. A walk, jumping jacks, cleaning something. Any activity that requires physical attention and produces a small, immediate sense of completion. The completion matters. It counters the open-loop feeling that the unresolved decision is generating. You are not solving the decision by cleaning your kitchen. You are changing your neurological state, and your neurological state is what's making the decision feel impossible. The decision itself, in most cases, was never actually impossible. The worst-case planning protocol is for the spirals that persist because they're attached to a genuine fear that hasn't been directly addressed. Stop trying to think around the fear. Write out exactly what happens if the feared outcome occurs. What do you do on day 1? Who do you call? What resources exist? What the recovery path looks like. Concretely, specifically, in writing. This works because anxiety about an outcome and a plan for handling that outcome cannot fully occupy the same mental space. The plan doesn't eliminate the fear. It contains it. It transforms the feared scenario from a dark room you're afraid to enter into a room you've already walked through, mapped, and identified the exits in. These protocols are not cures. They are interrupts. The goal is not to never spiral again. The goal is to spend less time inside the spiral before you find the exit. The exit is always the same. A small action. Something real. Something that exists in the world rather than in your head. The spiral lives in your head. It cannot follow you out. Chapter 11. Building the muscle. Nobody becomes decisive by deciding to be decisive. This is the part that disappoints people, because it means there's no conversion moment. No morning you wake up transformed. No insight that rewires everything. No chapter in a book, including this one, that permanently relocates you from the overthinking camp to the action camp. What there is instead is practice. Repetitive, unglamorous, occasionally embarrassing practice that produces results slowly, and then, at some point you can't quite identify afterward, produces them reliably. Decision-making is a trainable capacity, not a fixed trait, not a personality type you either have or don't. A skill, like any other skill, that responds to deliberate repetition with gradual improvement. The research on this is consistent. People who practice making decisions quickly become faster at it. People who defer decisions repeatedly become slower. The trajectory is not predetermined. It's chosen and then chosen again and then chosen again. The muscle metaphor is more literal than it sounds. The neural pathways supporting quick, confident decision-making strengthen through use. The ones supporting deliberation and delay strengthen through use. You are, right now, training one or the other. The question is only which one. Start absurdly small. This is not motivational hedging. It is the actual instruction. Decision sprints are the foundational exercise. Set a timer for 5 minutes. Make 20 decisions during that time. What to wear tomorrow? What to have for breakfast? Which podcast to listen to? Which message to respond to first? What to do with the next hour? The specific decisions don't matter. The speed matters. The point is not to make optimal choices. The point is to practice the neural motion of choosing without extended deliberation, to make the pathway more familiar, more automatic, less effortful. This feels trivial. It is not trivial. The pathway you're building during breakfast choice sprints is the same pathway you'll use for career decisions. The brain doesn't maintain separate infrastructure for small decisions and large ones. It uses the same equipment. Train the equipment on small decisions, and it becomes more capable for large ones. The key is speed over quality. You're not trying to make good choices during decision sprints. You are trying to make fast ones. Quality follows speed, eventually, because speed forces reliance on the accumulated judgment your brain already contains. The System 1 processing that was always capable of handling this, that you've been bypassing in favor of slower, noisier deliberation. Option elimination training addresses the specific difficulty of choosing from large fields. Instead of selecting the best option, which requires positive prediction of future satisfaction, which is hard, practice eliminating the worst options until one remains. This works because the brain handles negative assessment more readily than positive prediction. You know what you don't want with more confidence than you know what you do want. 3 restaurants. Eliminate the one that's too far. Eliminate the one with the cuisine you're less drawn to tonight. 1 remains. That's dinner. The process took 40 seconds. The outcome is essentially equivalent to what 20 minutes of comparison would have produced, because the factors you care about were always few and always apparent. I used to spend considerable time choosing what to read next. Significant time. The kind of time that, when I eventually noticed it, was slightly embarrassing relative to the stakes involved. I now keep a list of 3 books I'm genuinely interested in. When I finish something, I pick from the 3 without deliberation. The reading is indistinguishable in quality from what it was during the longer selection process. The time is recovered. Constraint training is the exercise for decisions that feel overwhelming because the option space is too large. Artificially impose limits. Budget constraints, geographic constraints, time constraints, categorical constraints. Whatever boundary reduces the number of variables to something your brain can process without overloading. The constraints don't need to be real. They just need to be respected. Give yourself 3 options maximum. Give yourself a price ceiling below what you could actually afford. Give yourself a geographic radius smaller than your actual range. These artificial limits aren't cheating. They're cognitive scaffolding, temporary structures that make the decision manageable while you build the capacity to handle it without them. Deadline training is progressive compression. Take decisions you currently give yourself a week to make and give yourself 3 days. Take decisions you currently give yourself a day to make and give yourself 2 hours. Take decisions you currently give yourself 2 hours to make and give yourself 20 minutes. Each compression reveals how much of your previous deliberation time was genuine versus padding. Almost always, the answer is, most of it was padding. The gut check exercise runs alongside all of these. Before you analyze any decision, before you open the research, before you make the list, before you consult anyone, notice your immediate reaction. What does the situation feel like before your conscious mind intervenes? Write it down. Then do your deliberation. Then compare your deliberate conclusion to your initial instinct. Track this over time. Most people discover that their instincts were accurate at rates that surprise them. Not always, not perfectly, but at rates that justify considerably more trust than they've been extending. The gut check exercise builds that trust through evidence rather than through assertion. You're not being told to trust your instincts. You're discovering, through accumulated comparison, that your instincts have been earning it. Past decision analysis is the retrospective version of the same exercise. Go back through significant decisions and categorize them by how long you deliberated before choosing. Then honestly assess the outcomes. Look for the correlation between deliberation length and decision quality. For most people, the correlation is weak or inverted. The decisions made quickly were not meaningfully worse than the decisions made slowly. In many cases, they were better, because they captured the clearer judgment that existed before anxiety and accumulated information clouded it. This retrospective evidence is durable in a way that abstract assurance isn't. It's your life, your decisions, your outcomes. The data is personal. Social decision-making is the advanced exercise. Practice making decisions in group contexts, quickly, clearly, without the endless consensus-seeking that characterizes overthinking extended into collaborative settings. Suggest the restaurant. Pick the movie. Propose the approach. Not because your preference is more important than others, but because someone moving the decision forward is almost always more valuable to the group than additional deliberation. Groups are relieved by decisiveness. They experience it as leadership, even when it's just a preference stated with conviction. The person who says, "I vote for the Italian place, anyone strongly opposed," is not being domineering. They're performing a service. They're ending the loop. The final exercise is documentation. Keep a simple log. Decision made, method used, outcome observed. Return to it quarterly. Watch the pattern build. Watch the evidence accumulate that your quick decisions survive, that they produce outcomes comparable to your deliberate ones, that the catastrophes your anxiety predicted did not materialize at the rates it suggested they would. This log becomes the most honest conversation you'll have about your decision-making, not a motivational account, an actual record. And actual records, reviewed honestly, have a way of revising beliefs that inspiration cannot touch. The muscle builds slowly. Then it holds weight you didn't think it could. That's how muscles work. Chapter 12. The discipline of not knowing. The most underrated intellectual skill you can develop is knowing when to stop learning about something. Not because knowledge is bad, because there is a specific point in every decision process where additional information stops improving your judgment and starts degrading it. And that point arrives earlier than you think, and most people sail past it without noticing and keep reading, keep researching, keep consulting, until they've accumulated enough material to be thoroughly confused about something they understood clearly 3 days ago. Strategic ignorance is the deliberate practice of not acquiring information that won't change your decision. This is not intellectual laziness. It requires more discipline than continued research, because continued research feels productive and feels virtuous and gives your anxiety something to do. Stopping requires you to sit with the discomfort of incomplete knowledge and choose anyway. That discomfort is the point. Getting comfortable with it is the work. Picture a man buying a used car. He knows he wants something reliable, fuel-efficient, under a specific price, with good safety ratings. He has identified 3 models that meet these criteria. He has read the reliability data. He knows enough. What he does next is spend 11 more days reading owner forums, watching review videos, comparing depreciation curves, analyzing regional pricing variations, and researching the manufacturing histories of specific component suppliers. None of this changes which car he buys. He buys the one he was going to buy on day 3. The 11 days produced elaborately detailed knowledge about cars he didn't purchase, and a thorough case of decision fatigue that made the actual transaction feel like a relief rather than an accomplishment. This is not research. This is the appearance of research. And the appearance of research is one of the most convincing forms of procrastination available to an intelligent person, because it has all the external markers of responsible preparation and none of the internal experience of actually moving forward. The 3-question filter is the basic tool for implementing strategic ignorance. Before pursuing any additional information, ask 3 things. Will this change which option I choose? Am I seeking this because I need it or because I'm not ready to stop? What is the minimum I actually need to make a reasonable decision? If the answers are no, the latter, and less than I currently have, stop. The research is finished. The decision is next. Information budgeting applies the same logic with a time structure. Before beginning research on any decision, specify in advance how long you'll spend, which specific questions you need answered, and which sources you'll consult. When the budget is exhausted, you decide with what you have. This prevents the research phase from expanding indefinitely to fill available time, which it will do in the absence of a defined boundary, because your anxiety will always find one more thing worth checking. There is a category of information that is particularly worth not acquiring. The category is information that will make you anxious without giving you anything actionable to do with the anxiety. If you're flying somewhere, knowing that the route has above-average turbulence seasons does not help you. It makes you more anxious on the flight without changing anything about the flight. If you're starting a business, reading extensively about failure rates in your sector does not improve your business. It introduces a well-documented statistical dread that sits in the background of your execution and slows it. Anxiety-producing information that produces no action is not information. It's just anxiety with a citation. I was preparing for a difficult conversation once, the kind that had been postponed long enough that postponing further was its own form of statement. I spent 2 days researching communication strategies, conflict resolution frameworks, psychological approaches to difficult dialogue. By the end of day 2, I had a sophisticated theoretical understanding of the conversation I needed to have, and I was considerably more anxious than I'd been at the start of day 1, when I'd simply known I needed to have it. The conversation, when I finally had it, was guided almost entirely by what was happening in real time. The actual words, the actual responses, the actual emotional texture of the exchange. The 2 days of preparation were largely irrelevant. The situation required presence, not theory. I had optimized for the wrong thing. Social media deserves specific mention here as a source of decision-contaminating information that is almost entirely avoidable. When you're trying to make a personal decision about your career, your relationships, your living situation, your priorities, the curated life highlights of people you went to school with are not relevant data. They are comparison material. And comparison material, introduced into an active decision process, reliably produces dissatisfaction with options that were perfectly adequate before the comparison. The person who was content with their reasonable salary until they learned what their college acquaintance makes isn't receiving useful information. They're receiving a context shift that makes their situation look different without making it actually be different. The number didn't change. The comparison changed. And comparisons, in most cases, are strategic ignorance failures. Information you didn't need that you allowed in anyway. Crowdsourcing decisions deserve similar skepticism. Posting a decision to a broad social network and inviting input is not consulting advisors. It's generating noise at scale. The responses you receive will reflect the respondents' personalities, biases, current moods, and desire to be helpful, not the specific contours of your situation, your values, your risk tolerance, or your actual options. You will receive 30 confident and contradictory opinions and be less certain than you were before you asked. One person whose judgment you specifically respect, consulted with specific information about your specific situation, is worth more than 100 crowdsourced opinions, usually worth more than 3. The advice quality scales with the specificity of the consultation, not with the volume of respondents. Creative work requires strategic ignorance most urgently. Writers who read extensively in their genre while writing often find their voice contaminated, pulled towards styles and structures that belong to other writers and fit other projects. The influences arrive at the wrong moment, when the work is still forming and most susceptible to being shaped by something external. The discipline is to limit input while output is active. Read widely before you start. Read widely after you finish. During the work, protect the signal. The same principle applies to entrepreneurship. Studying competitors exhaustively while building your product is a reliable way to build a product that responds to your competitors rather than to your customers. You end up optimizing against what already exists rather than toward what's actually needed. Some competitive awareness is useful. Comprehensive competitive analysis during active building is usually a form of creative interference dressed as strategic diligence. Strategic ignorance also means not revisiting decisions that are already made. Once you've chosen the restaurant, stop reading reviews. Once you've booked the vacation, stop researching alternatives. Once you've accepted the job, stop monitoring the listings. The decision is made. Additional information at this stage cannot improve the decision. It can only generate regret about a choice that may have been perfectly good, or anxiety about a path you're already on. This practice, letting closed decisions stay closed, is harder than it sounds for overthinkers, because the research habit doesn't automatically deactivate when the decision is finalized. It keeps running, generating material, offering revisions to a document that's already been submitted. The document has been submitted. Stop editing it. Strategic ignorance is not incuriosity. The most intellectually alive people are often the most disciplined about where they direct their curiosity, not because they care less, but because they understand that attention is finite and that unfocused curiosity is its own form of paralysis. Know enough to choose, then choose. Everything after that is just noise looking for somewhere to live. Chapter 13. The confidence that actually holds. The confidence you've been trying to build is the wrong kind. Not wrong in the sense of valueless. Wrong in the sense of structurally unsound. Built on a foundation that cannot bear the weight you're placing on it. The confidence that comes from certainty about outcomes. From knowing in advance that the thing will work. From having analyzed the situation thoroughly enough that failure feels unlikely. This confidence feels solid until something goes wrong. Then it doesn't just bend, it collapses. Because it was never load-bearing, it was decorative. It was the appearance of confidence rather than the thing itself. And the difference between those two becomes visible at exactly the moment you most need them to be the same. Real confidence is not outcome-dependent. This is the sentence that changes the architecture. Outcome-dependent confidence rises when things go well and falls when they don't. It requires the world to cooperate. It requires other people to respond the way you hoped. It requires circumstances to develop along the lines you predicted. And since the world doesn't reliably cooperate, since other people are unpredictable, since circumstances develop in ways nobody predicted, outcome-dependent confidence is perpetually at the mercy of events you don't control. Process-based confidence is different in kind, not just degree. It's built not on the belief that things will go well, but on the demonstrated knowledge that you can handle things when they don't. It comes from having made decisions, watched some of them fail, navigated the failure, and arrived on the other side still functional, still capable, sometimes wiser, occasionally grateful for the failure in retrospect, which is the strangest feeling and also a real one. A man starts a business. It fails in 18 months. Not spectacularly, just quietly runs out of money and customers and momentum and stops. He closes it. He learns things during those 18 months that could not have been learned any other way. About the market, about his own working style, about what he actually wants from work, about which of his assumptions were wrong and in which direction. He starts something else. It works better. Not because he's smarter than before, because he's been calibrated by reality in ways that no amount of prior research could have achieved. His confidence after the failure is higher than before it. Not because failure felt good, because surviving it demonstrated something his theoretical confidence never could. That the worst realistic outcome was navigable. That he was not destroyed by being wrong in public. That the floor, when he hit it, held. This is the confidence that actually holds. Built from evidence of survivability rather than predictions of success. The first step toward building it is reframing your relationship with failure at a level more specific than the general advice to embrace it. Embrace it is not an instruction, it's an aspiration. The actual instruction is this: document it. When something goes wrong, write down what happened, what you did next, and what the situation looked like 6 months later. Keep this record. Over time, this record becomes the most honest account of your actual resilience. Not your imagined resilience, not the resilience you hope you have, the demonstrated, evidenced, specific resilience you've shown in actual situations. And when the anxiety argues that you won't be able to handle the worst case, you have something to argue back with that isn't just reassurance. It's data. I made a decision once that cost me considerably. Financially, professionally, in terms of time I didn't recover. It was a genuine mistake. made with information I had at the time, and it was wrong. I spent several weeks in a state that I would describe as educational rather than enjoyable. Then I made the next decision, and the one after that. The mistake is now one entry in a record that contains many entries, and its weight in the overall account is proportionate to its actual significance, which is less than it felt at the time. The mistake didn't break the mechanism. The mechanism continued to work. That's the thing I know now that I didn't know before it happened. Response flexibility is the practical capacity underneath resilient confidence. It's not the belief that your plan will succeed. It's the ability to generate new plans when the first one doesn't. The confidence that comes from having multiple approaches available. Not because you planned them all in advance, but because you've practiced adapting often enough that adaptation feels like a normal part of the process rather than a crisis. Outcome independence is the related skill, the ability to evaluate your decision-making quality separately from your decision outcomes. These are genuinely different things. You can make a good decision that produces a bad outcome because outcomes depend on factors beyond your control. You can make a bad decision that produces a good outcome because luck exists and operates indiscriminately. Conflating the two is how people become either falsely confident after lucky outcomes or falsely devastated after unlucky ones. The question to ask about past decisions is not, did this work out? It's, given what I knew at the time and the values I held, was this a reasonable choice? Most of the time, the answer is yes. And yes to that question, regardless of the outcome, means the decision-making was sound. Sound decision-making, repeated consistently, produces good outcomes at rates that matter, even when individual decisions disappoint. Temporal perspective is what prevents individual bad outcomes from distorting the overall confidence architecture. When a decision goes poorly and the anxiety starts making large generalizations about your judgment, your capability, your future, perspective asks the simple question, will this matter in 5 years? Most of the time, the answer is no, or not much, or only insofar as it taught you something useful. Very few of the decisions that feel enormous in the moment are actually enormous in the life. The ones that are genuinely enormous are usually obvious as such and warrant proportionate consideration. The rest, the ones that feel enormous because anxiety has inflated them, benefit from the cold water of a 5-year lens. Decisive communication is an underestimated contributor to confidence. The language you use about your decisions shapes how you experience them. I think I might try this approach is a hedge. It signals that you're not fully committed, that you might change your mind, that the door is open for the decision to be revised by external pressure. I've decided to pursue this as a commitment. It changes your relationship to the choice. It makes the path feel chosen rather than provisional. Chosen paths are walked differently than provisional ones, with more energy, more attention, more full-bodied engagement. The commitment becomes self-reinforcing, and the confidence that comes from full commitment, from burning the boat, metaphorically, and having to make the island work, is qualitatively different from the hedged, provisional, one-foot-in confidence that overthinking produces. Regret immunity is the final piece. The practice of making peace with decisions that didn't work out without retroactively condemning the judgment that made them. This requires understanding that regret is usually about wanting information you didn't have, not about having made an unreasonable choice with the information you did have. Judging past decisions by present knowledge is a category error. It's unfair in a way that's also strategically destructive because it trains you to be more afraid of deciding, which is the opposite of the direction you need to go. The confidence that actually holds is quiet. It doesn't require everything to go well. It doesn't need the outcome to validate the choice. It sits underneath the results, stable, because it's built from demonstrated capability rather than hoped-for outcomes. It sounds like, "I've been wrong before and handled it. I can be wrong again." It doesn't sound like much. It turns out to be everything. Chapter 14. Advanced Techniques for Complex Decisions. Most decisions don't need this chapter. Most decisions need the 2-minute rule and a willingness to live with 80% certainty and a deadline that someone else knows about. Most decisions are not, despite the way your anxiety presents them, genuinely complex. They are ordinary decisions wearing the costume of complexity, dressed up by a brain that has confused the intensity of its own feeling about the choice with the actual difficulty of the choice. But some decisions are genuinely complex, not anxiety complex, structurally complex. Multiple stakeholders with competing interests, long-time horizons where early choices foreclose later options, significant asymmetry between what you gain if you're right and what you lose if you're wrong. Genuine value conflicts where the options don't just differ in quality, but in kind, where choosing between them means choosing between versions of yourself and what you're willing to trade. These decisions deserve more than 2 minutes. They don't deserve 2 months. What they deserve is structure, a way of moving through genuine complexity without either rushing past what matters or circling indefinitely around what doesn't. A man is offered a senior role at a company whose work he finds ethically complicated. The money is significant. The career trajectory is real. The compromise is also real, and not trivial, and not the kind of thing that resolves cleanly with a pros and cons list, because the pros and cons aren't in the same currency. You cannot directly compare career advancement against moral discomfort. They don't share a unit of measurement. Any list that pretends otherwise is just arithmetic performing as wisdom. This is genuine complexity. It requires a different approach. Values-based decision architecture is where genuine complexity gets resolved. Not dissolved, resolved. The difference matters. Dissolving complexity means pretending it isn't there. Resolving it means moving through it deliberately to a place where a choice can be made and held. Begin by identifying your core values in the relevant domain. Not your aspirational values, the ones you'd like to have, the ones that would make you feel good about yourself. Your actual operational values, the ones that have historically governed your behavior when things got difficult. These two lists are frequently different. The gap between them is where a great deal of self-deception lives, and looking at it honestly is uncomfortable and necessary. For each option, score its alignment with each value on a simple numerical scale. Don't average the scores. Look at the distribution. A choice that scores moderately on everything might be less revealing than a choice that scores very high on 2 values and very low on 1. Because the low score might be on the value that, when you look at it directly, you're not actually willing to compromise on. The scoring process surfaces what the list-making obscured. What this exercise does is force a confrontation with your actual hierarchy of values rather than your imagined one. Most people discover, when they do this honestly, that their real priorities are somewhat different from the ones they denounce publicly. That's not hypocrisy. That's the difference between who you are and who you're still becoming. Both are worth knowing about. Scenario planning with probability weighting is for decisions where the range of possible outcomes is genuinely wide and the downside scenarios are genuinely worth preparing for. Not every decision, most decisions don't have genuinely catastrophic downside scenarios, despite the anxiety's insistence otherwise. But some do. And for those, the structured scenario approach prevents both the paralysis of trying to prepare for every possible future and the recklessness of preparing for none. Identify 3 scenarios for each option: best case, worst case, most likely case. For each, estimate 2 things only. How probable is this? And how well positioned are you to handle it if it occurs? The second question is the one that matters more than people expect. A low probability catastrophe that you're well positioned to survive is less threatening than a moderate probability setback you have no plan for. The scenario matrix is not for predicting the future. It's for understanding your own resilience relative to different outcomes. The consultant method is a perspective shift rather than a process, and it works precisely because it removes the emotional load that clouds judgment about your own decisions. Imagine you've been hired at significant expense to advise someone else on this exact decision. You have the same information they have. You have 1 hour. You need to give a recommendation. What do you recommend? The recommendation arrives faster and more clearly than you expect. Not because the consultant perspective is smarter, it's working with identical information. Because it removes the self-referential anxiety that attaches specifically to decisions about your own life. The consultant doesn't lie awake worrying about whether they made the right call. They make the best call available with the information on hand, document their reasoning, and move to the next client. You are both the consultant and the client. The consultant in you already knows what to recommend. The client in you has been refusing to hear it. Progressive commitment is the structural approach for decisions where the stakes are high enough that a single irreversible commitment feels genuinely disproportionate to your current level of knowledge. The solution is not more research. The solution is a sequence of smaller commitments, each of which generates real information that informs the next one. Considering a significant career change. The first commitment is not quitting your job. It's having 3 conversations with people who do the work you're considering. Real conversations, specific, about the actual day-to-day texture of the role. The second commitment is not enrolling in a 2-year program. It's taking 1 course, 1 workshop, 1 weekend of genuine contact with the field. Each step is recoverable from. Each step produces knowledge that no equivalent amount of research could generate. The path toward the large commitment is built from small ones, and at each stage you have more information than you did at the last. This approach is not timidity, it's epistemically sound. You are not avoiding the decision. You are making a series of smaller decisions that converge toward it, each one better informed than the last. None of them requiring you to bet everything on your imagination of how things will go. The advisory board method is for decisions that are genuinely beyond your individual expertise, not decisions that feel beyond it because you're anxious, but decisions that actually involve domains where you have real knowledge gaps. The distinction matters. Many people consult advisors to manage anxiety rather than to address genuine ignorance, and advisors consulted for anxiety management tend to produce more anxiety rather than less, because their input introduces new variables your brain then needs to process. Real advisory consultation is narrow and specific. You identify 2 or 3 people whose expertise is directly relevant and whose judgment you have specific reasons to trust. You give them precise information about your situation rather than a general account of your anxiety about it. You ask for their recommendation, not their analysis. The analysis you already have. The recommendation is what you need. You set a deadline for gathering this input, and when the deadline arrives, you decide. The difference between useful consultation and anxiety-driven consultation is whether you're seeking information you genuinely lack or reassurance for a conclusion you've already reached. If it's the latter, no advisor will provide it in durable form. The reassurance lasts until the next loop begins, and then you need more of it, and the consultation process becomes its own form of deferral. Asymmetric risk analysis cuts through complexity by focusing specifically on what you stand to lose versus what you stand to gain, and whether the ratio justifies the action. Some options have enormous potential upside and limited downside. These are the options your anxiety will make feel equally dangerous as options with catastrophic downside potential, because anxiety doesn't naturally distinguish between them. The analysis does. For each option, ask 2 questions with genuine specificity. What is the worst realistic outcome, and how do I recover from it? What is the best realistic outcome, and what does it make possible? Options where the worst case is survivable and the best case is transformative deserve to be weighted heavily in favor of action, regardless of how the anxiety is weighting them. Options where the worst case is genuinely catastrophic warrant the caution the anxiety is recommending. The key word is realistic. Not imaginable, realistic. Your brain will generate imaginable worst cases of considerable vividness and 0 probability. The analysis asks for realistic ones, outcomes that have meaningful probability given actual circumstances, not outcomes that are possible in the technical sense of not violating physical law. The regret minimization framework asks you to do something your anxiety actively resists. Take a long, temporal perspective on a decision that currently feels urgent and immediate. Project yourself to the end of your life, not morbidly, but honestly, and ask which choice you would be more likely to regret not having made. This question has a well-documented asymmetry in its answers. People regret inactions at substantially higher rates than actions. They regret chances not taken more than chances taken that didn't work out. The things you didn't try haunt you differently than the things you tried and failed. This asymmetry should influence how you weight the options in front of you. The choice that involves risk but possibility should receive credit for the regret it prevents, not just the anxiety it generates. The choice that involves safety but foreclosure should be charged for the regret it produces, not just credited for the comfort it provides. I spent a long time making the safer choice in a particular domain, and I was aware while making it that I was making the safer choice, and I told myself this was wisdom rather than fear. The two are distinguishable. Wisdom knows what it's protecting and why. Fear just protects. When I finally stopped making the safer choice, I discovered that the thing I'd been protecting wasn't as fragile as I'd believed, and the thing I'd been avoiding wasn't as dangerous. The regret for the years of the safer choice is specific and real and not dramatic. It's just there. A quiet, settled awareness of time spent managing an anxiety rather than living past it. The cost of delay analysis is the final technique, and it's the most honest one. For any decision you've been postponing, calculate what the postponement is actually costing. Not hypothetically, specifically. The compound interest foregone, the salary differential accumulated, the opportunity that moved to someone else, the version of yourself that was ready to begin and has been waiting. These costs are real. They accrue quietly and without announcement. And when you calculate them honestly, the case for continued deliberation almost always weakens past the point of justification. Complex decisions deserve structured approaches. They don't deserve infinite time. The structure is not a substitute for judgment. It's the container that lets judgment operate without being overwhelmed by the volume of what's at stake. Inside the container, you think clearly, move deliberately, and arrive at a choice you can hold. Outside the container, you circle, and circling, however sophisticated the radius, is still just standing still. They're not who you think. They're not the loudest person in the room, not the most confident seeming, not the least anxious, not the ones who never second-guess themselves or lie awake running scenarios or wish they'd handled something differently. Decisive people feel all of those things. They just don't let the feeling become the stopping point. The image most people carry of a decisive person is someone for whom choosing is easy, frictionless. Someone whose certainty arrives naturally and early and holds without effort. This image is wrong, and it's worth correcting specifically. Because as long as you believe that decisiveness feels like certainty, you'll keep waiting to feel certain before you act. And certain, as a feeling, is not reliably available in advance of the thing you're trying to feel certain about. What decisive people have is not the absence of doubt. It's a different relationship with doubt. They experience it as weather rather than as verdict. It moves through. They don't take it as evidence that they're not ready. They take it as evidence that the decision is real, that it matters, that they're paying appropriate attention to it. And then they decide anyway. A woman I know makes decisions at a speed that used to make me uncomfortable to observe. Not because she's careless. She's one of the more thoughtful people I know. But because her deliberation is internal and efficient and doesn't require external performance to feel legitimate to her. She gathers what she needs. She consults what's relevant. And she chooses. The choosing looks effortless from the outside. From the inside, she's told me, it doesn't always feel effortless. It just feels done. And done, she has decided, is more valuable than certain. That's the whole philosophy, condensed. Done is more valuable than certain. The transformation this book is describing isn't a personality transplant. You won't become someone who never overthinks. You'll become someone who overthinks for shorter periods, who recognizes the spiral earlier, who has tools for interrupting it, who has built enough evidence of their own survivability that the anxiety's predictions carry less weight than they used to. That's not a small change. It just doesn't feel dramatic from the inside because it happens gradually, through repetition, without a moment you can point to and say, there. That's when everything shifted. Everything shifted somewhere in the accumulated practice, in the small decisions made quickly, in the spiral caught early, in the timer that went off and the choice that followed, and the non-catastrophic outcome that followed that. In the record of decisions that mostly held, and the ones that didn't, and the continued functioning through both. What you're building is not confidence that the future will go well. You're building confidence that you can move through it regardless of how it goes. These sound similar. They are structurally different. The first requires the world's cooperation. The second only requires yours. The overthinking won't disappear. Some decisions will still take longer than they should. Some nights the ceiling will still collect your unresolved loops. Some choices will still feel heavier than their actual weight warrants, and you will still reach for more information when you already have enough. And you will still occasionally mistake the feeling of analysis for the fact of progress. But less, and less often, and with a faster recovery when it happens. That's the realistic version of what this produces. Not transformation, recalibration. A gradual shift in your default. From wait until you're ready to move until you're ready. From think until it's clear to act until it's clear. From certainty as the prerequisite to action as the path toward it. The most productive thing you did last Tuesday was think about doing things. That was the opening line. Here's what it costs. Over a life. Not any single Tuesday. Not any particular decision deferred or opportunity missed or loop that ran too long. What it costs, compounded across years, is the quiet accumulation of a life experienced mostly in preparation for itself. You already know what you're going to do. You've known for a while.